I don't care who you are. This is an HOA inspection. Well, I am the sheriff. She forced her way into a black man's home in the disguise of an HOA inspection. Completely unaware, she had just walked into a trap written by the law itself. She thought her title made her untouchable. She thought she could push into any house she wanted, especially his. But what Cynthia Sterling didn't know was that Elias Vance wasn't just another homeowner she could bully. And the moment she crossed his doorway, the moment she acted like she owned his home, she set off a chain of events she would spend the rest of her life regretting. The trouble didn't start the day Cynthia Sterling forced her way inside the house. It started a week earlier, the first time she ever tried it. Elias Vance had barely finished moving his boxers in, still unpacking things in his living room, when he heard a sharp knock. No, not a knock. More like someone testing whether the door handle would turn. He reached the entrance just in time to see the knob jiggle and the door push forward half an inch. Then Cynthia Sterling stepped back, pretending she hadn't just tried to let herself in. Racist HOA president. Self-appointed queen of the neighborhood. A woman who spoke like every rule existed to serve her. She didn't even greet him. She just lifted her clipboard like it was a royal decree and said, "I need to perform an HOA inspection. Let me inside." Elias Vance held the door firmly between them. "You're not entering my house," she scoffed. "You don't have a choice. New residents must comply, especially when your yard is already out of code and your curtains don't match the neighborhood color scheme." He stared at her. "Cynthia, you have no authority to step inside my home without permission. None." She didn't like that. Her face tightened, her eyes narrowed, and for a second she tried to push the door, but Elias Vance didn't budge. "Fine," she hissed. "I'll be back, and next time you won't stop me." She turned and marched down the driveway as if she had written the Constitution herself. That night, Elias Vance called the one person who would understand exactly how serious this was: his cousin, Sheriff David Bradley. Sheriff of the county. Real authority, real law. When Elias Vance told Sheriff David Bradley what happened, the sheriff didn't shout. He didn't even sound surprised. He just sighed heavily, like he'd seen this movie too many times. "She'll try again," Sheriff David Bradley said. "And when she does, don't stop her." Elias Vance blinked. "Do you want me to let her in?" "Yes," Sheriff David Bradley replied. "Let her think she won. Let her enter. Then call me immediately. I'll handle the rest." A plan started forming. One Cynthia Sterling would never see coming. And sure enough, few days later, just as the sun dipped behind the houses, Elias Vance heard that same sharp knock. Except this time, she didn't wait for an answer. She pushed the door wide open. "This is an HOA inspection," she barked. And that was the moment the trap quietly snapped shut. Cynthia Sterling didn't stroll into the house like a visitor. She stormed in like she owned the deed. The moment the door swung open, Elias Vance barely had time to step back before she pushed past his shoulder with the full confidence of someone who had been rehearsing this moment for days. "This property is out of compliance," Cynthia Sterling barked, waving her clipboard like a weapon. "I told you I'd be back." Have you ever dealt with someone who thought the rules didn't apply to them? What would you do if your neighborhood's HOA president pushed their way into your home like they owned the place? Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing where our viewers are tuning in from. And if you believe people like Cynthia Sterling should finally face consequences for their actions, smash that like button and subscribe to Care and Conflict. Because standing up to abusive power starts with telling these stories. Elias Vance didn't argue. Sheriff David Bradley's voice echoed in his mind. "Let her enter. Call me immediately." So he stepped aside, watching her with the cold patience of someone who already knew how this was going to end. Cynthia Sterling strutted deeper into the living room, scanning everything with disgust. She dragged her fingers across the bookshelf like she was checking for hidden crimes. She opened doors without asking, peered into rooms as if searching for contraband, and muttered to herself with the arrogance of a self-appointed dictator. "Oh, this is worse than I thought," she said loudly, pretending to take notes. "Incorrect furniture style, inappropriate curtain length, and your lawn. Completely unacceptable. This will require a full violation report." Elias Vance pulled out his phone quietly behind her back and sent one message to Sheriff David Bradley. "She's inside." Cynthia Sterling continued through the house obliviously, moving with the fake authority of someone who had never been challenged. She poked her head into the laundry room, then the kitchen, then tried another door like she was on a treasure hunt for power. "This community has standards," she said sharply, "and people like you don't get to ignore them." Elias Vance kept his expression calm. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rise to her bait. He simply watched her bury herself deeper into the trap she thought she was setting for him. Then, without warning, the front door opened again. But this time, it wasn't Cynthia Sterling. Sheriff David Bradley stepped into the doorway wearing casual clothes, no uniform, no boots, no badge visible, just calm authority in human form. His expression was steady, controlled, and razor-sharp. Cynthia Sterling didn't even turn around. She just shouted over her shoulder, "Excuse me, we're in the middle of an HOA inspection. Get out of this house unless you're a resident." Sheriff David Bradley's voice cut through the room, calm, controlled, and unmistakably authoritative. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "stop what you're doing." Cynthia Sterling froze mid-movement. She turned slowly, confusion flashing across her face when she saw Sheriff David Bradley standing there, someone she clearly didn't recognize. Cynthia Sterling stared at Sheriff David Bradley like he was an inconvenience instead of the storm heading straight for her. She planted a hand on her hip, lifted her chin, and snapped. "Who are you to tell me to stop? This is an official HOA inspection. You have no authority here. None. Now get out before I report you too." Elias Vance didn't react. He kept watching Cynthia Sterling, letting her dig herself deeper, letting her mouth carry her right over the edge. Sheriff David Bradley warned her about. Sheriff David Bradley stepped further into the living room, calm, composed, not raising his voice. "Ma'am," he said again, "stop right now." That's enough. But Cynthia Sterling wasn't listening. She jabbed the air with her clipboard. "I don't care if you're his friend, his cousin, or some random neighbor. HOA rules apply to everyone. And this man," she pointed at Elias Vance, like she was accusing him of a crime, "is in violation. I have every right to enter, inspect, and enforce." Sheriff David Bradley reached into his pocket. Cynthia Sterling kept talking. "You have 5 seconds to leave before I call HOA security. I have the authority. I have the..." The room went silent when Sheriff David Bradley held up the badge. County Sheriff's Badge. Real metal, real authority, real law. Cynthia Sterling's mouth hung half open, the rest of her sentence dying on her tongue. Her eyes widened, shrinking with every second she stared at that badge. Sheriff David Bradley's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Cynthia Sterling," he said plainly, "you are under arrest for criminal trespass and unlawful entry into a private residence." Cynthia Sterling stumbled backward like the floor had tilted. "Ah, arrest?" she whispered. "For what? I'm doing my job. This is an HOA matter. You can't arrest me for protecting the community." Sheriff David Bradley stepped forward. "You didn't protect anything. You forced your way into a homeowner's private property without consent. That is a crime." Cynthia Sterling shook her head rapidly, panic climbing her throat. But how is the sheriff here? Why you? Why now?" Elias Vance finally spoke, his voice steady. "Because the sheriff is my cousin, and you just made the last mistake you'll ever make in this neighborhood." Cynthia Sterling's knees wobbled. Her clipboard slipped from her hand and hit the floor. Sheriff David Bradley lifted his radio. "This is Sheriff Bradley. I need units at my location for detainment and transport." Cynthia Sterling gasped, trembling. "Wait, please. There has to be another way." But the moment the call went out, her fate was sealed. Cynthia Sterling's face twisted in disbelief as Sheriff David Bradley's words settled over the room like a closing steel door. She stumbled back another step, shaking her head as if that could undo everything she had just done. "You can't arrest me," she cried. "I'm the HOA president. I run this community." Sheriff David Bradley cut her off with a look sharp enough to silence a crowd. "You don't run anything inside someone else's home," he said. "You broke in. You crossed the line and you knew exactly what you were doing." Cynthia Sterling kept trembling. Her voice wavered. "I didn't mean to break in, I thought. I thought I had authority. I thought this was allowed." Elias Vance watched her unravel, watched her posture collapse into something desperate and small. A few minutes earlier, she stood in his hallway like a conqueror. Now she looked like someone realizing she had walked straight into the jaws of the law. Sirens approached in the distance, slow at first, then growing louder as the backup sheriff David Bradley called for arrived. 2 patrol deputies stepped through the door. They paused when they saw Sheriff David Bradley in casual clothes, then nodded respectfully when they recognized him. Sheriff 1 said, "What's the situation?" Sheriff David Bradley pointed at Cynthia Sterling. "It's trespassing, unlawful entry, attempted impersonation of authority, and harassment of a homeowner. She refused multiple commands to stop." Cynthia Sterling's voice cracked. No, please. This is a misunderstanding. I was protecting the community. I'm the president. You can't ruin my reputation over this." One deputy approached her slowly. "Ma'am, turn around and place your hands behind your back." Cynthia Sterling clutched her chest. "Wait, please. Can't we talk about this? Sheriff, please." "I didn't know he was your cousin." Sheriff David Bradley's jaw tightened. "The problem isn't that he's my cousin. The problem is you treat everyone like you own them. And today, you picked the wrong house." Cynthia Sterling finally turned around, hands shaking violently behind her. The cuffs clicked shut. Her breath hitched. She looked toward the doorway as if hoping the HOA would magically appear and save her. They didn't. Cynthia Sterling screamed from the patrol car, her voice breaking. "This isn't fair. I was enforcing rules, but the deputies closed the door." The vehicle pulled away, and as Elias Vance stood in his quiet living room again, Sheriff David Bradley beside him, he knew one thing. Cynthia Sterling had finally learned the truth. Some doors are never hers to open. If you believe no bully, HOA or otherwise, should ever get away with abusing their power, smash that like button and subscribe to Karen Conflict. Because the moment we stop telling these stories is the moment people like Cynthia Sterling start thinking they can get away with it again.